When great empires fall, they rarely leave behind peace. They leave behind a vacuum. Around the year 2004 BCE, the mighty third dynasty of Ur, the last great Sumerian empire, collapsed under invasion, rebellion, and famine. Its temples were abandoned. Its canals broke. Its kings disappeared from history. But Mesopotamia did not fall silent. Instead, it fractured. Dozens of cities, once united under a single crown, now stood alone, suspicious, ambitious, and ready to compete. Each had a king. Each wanted power. Each believed the gods favored them. And in the middle of this fractured world, on a quiet bend of the Euphrates River, stood a small, unremarkable town. Its name was Babylon. No one yet knew that this town would reshape law, kingship, and civilization itself. But to understand Babylon, we must first understand the broken world it inherited. For nearly a century, the kings of Ur had ruled southern Mesopotamia with precision. They maintained canals, standardized taxes, organized labor, and built monumental temples called ziggurats that touched the sky. This was one of the most organized states the world had ever seen. Then it unraveled. Nomadic groups from the west, known as the Amorites, moved into Mesopotamia. At the same time, eastern highland peoples, the Elamites, invaded from the Zagros Mountains. Trade routes failed. Food shortages spread. Cities rebelled. Ur fell. And with it, the idea that Mesopotamia should be ruled by one king. What followed was not a dark age, but a competitive age. An age of city-states. The kings of Ur had controlled a vast, interconnected system. They moved grain from fertile fields to urban centers, managed immense herds of sheep for wool production, and oversaw a bureaucracy of scribes who tracked every single good. When this system collapsed, it wasn't just a political change. It was an economic catastrophe. Imagine a modern global supply chain suddenly vanishing. That was the scale of the crisis. The generations that followed the fall of Ur had to rebuild their world from the ground up, but without a central authority to guide them. Each city now had to fend for itself. Each king had to find his own source of legitimacy. This new era was dangerous, chaotic, but also filled with opportunity for those bold enough to seize it. Two cities rose quickly from the ruins, Isin and Larsa. Both claimed to be the rightful heirs of Ur's legacy. Both controlled important farmland and canals. Both fought constantly, sometimes with armies, sometimes with diplomacy, sometimes through marriage alliances. For over a century, Isin and Larsa struggled for dominance over southern Mesopotamia. Their rivalry defined the political landscape. The king of Isin, Ishbi-Era, was a former official of Ur who established his own dynasty, styling himself as the successor to the great Sumerian kings. He even managed to recapture the city of Ur and its revered temple to the moon god. For a time, it seemed like Isin might actually reunite the land. But Larsa, its southern neighbor, resisted fiercely. Under its ambitious kings, Larsa expanded its own territory, capturing city after city, slowly chipping away at Isin's power. Their struggle was a century-long tug-of-war. They built walls against each other, diverted water to weaken each other, and sent spies to incite rebellion in each other's territories. But they were not alone. To the northeast, the city of Eshnunna controlled vital trade routes leading from the Iranian plateau. To the northwest, the city of Mari commanded the Euphrates corridor, linking Mesopotamia to Syria and the Mediterranean. Mesopotamia had become a chessboard, no empire, only players. And while these powerful cities competed loudly for dominance, one small city remained quiet: Babylon. It was a minor player in a game of giants, barely a blip on the political map. The Amorites were not invaders in the traditional sense. They did not arrive with massive armies to conquer and destroy. They arrived slowly, over generations, as semi-nomadic pastoralists seeking better grazing land for their flocks. They settled on the edges of cities. They married into local families. They worked as laborers and mercenaries, and eventually they ruled. Across Mesopotamia, Amorite names began appearing in positions of power. They were adaptable. They learned the local Akkadian language. They worshipped the Mesopotamian gods, and they ruled like native monarchs, even adopting the grand titles of the Sumerian kings who came before them. This was a gradual cultural fusion, not a sudden conquest. Babylon, too, came under Amorite leadership. Around 1894 BCE, an Amorite chieftain named Sumu-Abum declared Babylon independent from its powerful neighbors. This moment is considered the beginning of what historians call the Old Babylonian period. At the time, this declaration was probably not very significant to the kings of Isin or Larsa. Babylon was not impressive. It had no great temples like Ur. It had no legendary history like Kish. It had no vast territory. But it had something more important: position. Babylon sat directly on the Euphrates River, at a point where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are closest. This meant trade boats moving up and down the river had to pass its walls. It meant easy access to the water needed for irrigation canals, the lifeblood of Mesopotamian agriculture. It meant connection north to the powerful trading hub of Mari, south to the old cultural heartland of Larsa and Isin, and east via overland routes to Eshnunna. Babylon was not powerful, but it was perfectly placed. It sat at the intersection of the major political and economic arteries of Mesopotamia. Its early kings understood this. They were not glorious conquerors like the legends of old. They were pragmatists. They did not rush into wars like Isin and Larsa. Instead, they focused inward. They strengthened their city walls, making Babylon a defensible fortress. They dug new canals, expanding their agricultural output and securing their food supply. They built temples, honoring the gods and establishing their city as a legitimate religious center. They secured trade. They made themselves a reliable and safe stop for merchants traveling the Euphrates. While larger cities exhausted themselves in endless rivalry, Babylon grew quietly richer, safer, and more stable. It was a strategy of patience in an age of aggression. While its neighbors were focused on winning the current game, Babylon was busy changing the rules. It was learning something its neighbors had forgotten. Patience is power. For nearly 100 years, Babylon remained politically small, but strategically smart. Its kings avoided major conflicts. They formed alliances carefully, sometimes siding with one power, sometimes with another, but never fully committing to a fight that could destroy them. They were playing the long game. No one saw Babylon as a threat. It was seen as a second-rate power, a useful but minor ally. And that was exactly why it would become a threat. Because in a few decades, a king would rise from this patient city who understood the fractured politics of Mesopotamia better than anyone alive. A king who would use diplomacy before war, time before force, and law before fear. His name was Hammurabi, but Hammurabi's empire was not born in a vacuum. It was not the creation of a single man's genius. It was born from this world, a world of rival cities, ambitious Amorite rulers, broken unity, and simmering opportunity. The stage for his conquest was set by his ancestors, who patiently built the foundation. Babylon did not rise because it was the strongest from the start. It rose because it understood the weakness of others. It watched while its rivals bled each other dry. It learned from their mistakes. It prepared for the right moment. And when that moment came, it acted decisively. In the next episode, we will see how Babylon's early Amorite kings transformed a quiet riverside town into a fortified, wealthy city ready for the man who would turn it into an empire. We'll explore the reigns of Sumu-Abum's successors, who continued his careful strategy of building, waiting, and preparing. Because before Hammurabi could rule Mesopotamia, Babylon first had to become Babylon. Loved having you here. Hit like and subscribe for more epic tales of empires.